Great. Welcome back to another episode of the Simple Jargon podcast. This is episode 11. Prometheus, do you want to say hello? Prometheus, come in. All right. So we got some really, really fun and exciting topics to discuss today. Actually, one particular topic that I'm excited to talk about because Peter and I are uniquely situated to actually have some insight and I think some valuable discussion about it. So without further ado, I will let Peter introduce our subject of conversation, and I will try and get this guy to calm down.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Just like last time, we made we talked about Vivek, and next day he was out of the race before we couldn't publish the podcast. And last podcast was about DeSantis. Again, him being in a race, and next day he quits the race. So it was kind of interesting how that all shaped up. But what I really want to talk to you about today was the Tucker and his visit to Canada. And one of the interesting thing about it that I watched today was he actually made phone call to Prime Minister Trudeau. Of course, you don't get hold of anybody, so he left message, "We coming to Canada, and we're coming to liberate Canada." And I thought that he just seemed to have so much fun with it. And one of the reasons I think he's having fun with it, because he's thinking he's going to Canada, and Canada is not a country that, hopefully is not going to persecute him like many other countries that he would probably not dare to say anything like that.
Yeah.
And then I, of course, watched his speeches in Canada that seemed to be, doing there. And it was like so inspiring. I was really surprised by his bluntness. And the things he said, I'm actually totally shocked that he said some of those things. And I'm assuming he's probably going to get into trouble for that one way or the other. My kind of suspicion is that they might even try to block him coming to Canada next time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if they would come up. Yeah, with
Canada
some kind
has
of
a history
reason.
of doing that. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think there's a lot of precedent for foreign nationals being tried and like civilly or criminally in Canada for those kinds of things. But the biggest example I can remember is Canada at one point had completely barred Eminem for coming to Canada when I was a kid, when Eminem was a really, really big thing, right? It was like he wasn't allowed to come to Canada. Canada had just said, oh, no, we don't want that kind of stuff here in Canada. Canadians had their own rappers saying just as nasty stuff, but it was a foreigner who was doing this, an American, and so they made a big show about you're not allowed to come to Canada. We won't have that kind of behavior here. So I will not be surprised if that happens. I would be more surprised if there's some kind of like litigation towards him. But I'm curious enough about it that I'm inclined to ask some of the lawyers that I know about that, because I'm kind of curious if there is room for that in Canada, and I would be worried about him for that. But I'm super glad he said it.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I'm not sure, because I came home from work and I was watching like thing on a YouTube feed first about his speech, and it felt that that speech was made in some kind of stadium that was different than the one you sent me. And so I don't know if he made more than one, presentations or something. And also the subjects seemed to be different he talked about from the one link that you sent me. Now, what was interesting thing, when I went to try to go to that link next day, I mean, like to the history in YouTube, it was gone. And I cannot find it anywhere now.
The one that I sent you?
No, the one that I watched.
Interesting.
And so I don't know where it went, or if I'm somehow misrepresenting, but I would bet because it was a different subject that he was talking about at the link that you sent me. So I don't know what happened there, but it's just strange because I'm going to the history several times. Nothing is missing, but that video that I watched is missing from my history in YouTube. So now I wonder what happened there, you know. And one of the
It could
things
just
that
be that to be fair, it could just be that the users reposted the video because they made an edit, and so if they deleted the piece of their own volition, not something malicious by YouTube, then it would disappear from your
right,
history because it's no longer
right.
an item, so it doesn't populate in your history feed.
It's a possibility.
But
Now, one thing
who knows?
that really touched me in that video because it was very revolutionary, in my opinion. It was like speech like that should start revolutions. Really, what I was
Sorry,
watching.
just so I know, are you talking about the video that I sent you, or are you still talking about the one that disappeared
The
from your
one that
history?
I watched, but
Okay,
also the
okay.
one you sent me. They are both very powerful, but the one that I watched was a big crowd cheering, stuff to it, and um, it just felt like this is a type of speech that should really spark the revolution. And I think basically happened in Czech Republic. I think with before the Berlin wall came down. That's how the revolution kind of started there. They call it Velvet Revolution. It was a peaceful revolution, but after all, it was a revolution that changed the system. Now, one thing that was a little bit sad to me because all the things that he said should be really voiced by Canadians, not somebody that comes in. That was kind of sad to me. And second, that some of those things that he said were so powerful, but the response from the audience was just kind of low, like from people that are like beaten down, depressed, or even worried to say something because they're afraid of prosecution by the government. And it kind of left me a little bit sad that didn't feel like that response like, yeah, we need to do something about it. So that was kind of some of the sense that I got out of it.
To be fair, Albertans are particularly conservative, so unless it's the Calgary Stampede, they're probably not going to be hooting and hollering. But anyways, one of the
Yeah.
things, and again, I think when you were watching the video that I'd sent you, I'm hoping you did a better job than I did of kind of like taking note of a couple of real key points that he made. But the the one thing that I really just want to point out what Tucker did a good job of, then I do a bad job when I'm speaking to other Canadians, and this will be an opportunity for any Canadians that are watching this to understand what I mean when and I think a lot of Canadians, when they talk bad about Canada right now, we're we're talking about the direction this country is going in terms of the direction the government is pushing this country. Its political and social agenda is something that a lot of us are very, very, very concerned about. And it's really, really easy to talk bad about Canada because the decisions Canada is making. And Tucker did a great job of just right off the hop differentiating, saying, Canada is a beautiful place. It's an amazing place. It has amazing people, it has an amazing culture, and all of that can be true while Canadians or foreigners looking at Canada can be so disappointed in Canada. And does that make sense? Like his ability to kind of like
Yes, he made the same point. Um, Something that I watched about the United States when he's saying it became so painfully obvious that the government doesn't listen to people at all. They do their own thing, and no matter what the you know people want, and somehow they manage to push their own agenda. So kind of, and the question really was about how then the system is truly functioning because we keep electing those people and they just seem to be doing their own agenda that doesn't really represent what people want. So I think that was the same thing about what you're trying to say, that you try to differentiate between what the government is doing in Canada and what the most regular Canadians want or what they would like to see. So when you talk to the other people, like, do you get any response from anybody, or do you talk about it at all, really, with anybody, or that people actually really express something what they feel or not?
So what I find in Canada is that there's no shortage of Canadians that are opinionated. So I'm not a unique Canadian in the sense that I have an opinion that I hold very, very passionately. What I find is that Canadians have developed a kind of how do I describe this? Like a passive aggressive culture. No, that's not the quite right description. That there is it's almost taboo to discuss Canadian society. We're not talking about the government. We're talking about like the society, the culture of Canada. It's like taboo, I find, to discuss that in a negative light in any way. It's like Canadians look at Americans who are like America, like that kind of stereotypical American that waves the flag and is very like pro America because
Yeah,
they just
well,
love the United States and the bald eagle and hell yeah, brother. They look at that and like, haha, that's ridiculous. But that's the exact culture Canadians have about Canada. They're not as ostentatious and outwardly, you know, doing the same thing, but Canadians are unbelievably proud of Canada and of being Canadians. And so I find, and that's not a bad thing. That's an awesome thing. You should be proud of your country, like regardless of what Justin Trudeau does right now. Like you should be proud of being Canadian because this is an amazing country. It's a land of opportunity compared to so many places out there. That doesn't mean you don't fight for what you think is a better version of Canada, and we absolutely should. But like, um, Canadians should be proud. But I think the result of that is that the, socially, it's a lot more difficult to kind of have open and constructive conversations that paint Canada's anything in Canada currently in an overtly negative light. Does that make sense?
yes, yeah. What you I guess what you were trying to say is that um, that even though there might be changes happening in Canada, that Canadians might not be even any more proud of what's going on, but they maybe still live more in the past when that was like something to be proud of. And it's like when you kind of throw the when you have that saying about that you're boiling the frog in the water and frog doesn't notice it. That's like those.
We had some technical issues right here in the podcast, and some awesome things about Riverside. There's some drawbacks to Riverside. Anyways, long story short, we got the audio stuff figured out. Turns out it was an issue on my end, but the thing I've not yet been able to figure out, and I think will forever be a mystery, is how Peter jumps from the allegory about boiling a frog and then not noticing because of the gradual change in temperature, to coming back and him being just very, very positive that he was talking about something else anyway.
Yeah, I was giving that example of when I came to Canada and originally was living there, except for the weather, it still felt like there was some kind of we could kind of feel proud of Canada. And
Except
that
for the
I
weather.
think that people probably still live at remembering that past. Because it takes time for people to realize that things change so much that you cannot be thinking in past terms. You have to think about what's now, and what's now. It's nothing what I remember Canada was like, a bunch of years ago. Does it make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. No, it does. And then just to kind of like before we actually maybe talk about the substance of Tucker's discussion, the the best example I think that highlights what I'm talking about. The Canadians can be profoundly upset and annoyed and angry about the direction Canada is going, while simultaneously being proud to be Canadians. Is
Uh,
those fuck Trudeau. Sorry to use the F word, Peter. I know we try to avoid that here on this podcast, but that's the flag. They're the fuck Trudeau flags. And I'll just put one up as an example for any Americans who haven't seen these, but it's just to show like this flag that you can see right now is a perfect example of Canadians maintaining some level of patriotism and profound love of Canada while also wanting to express a disdain and anger towards, in this example, the Trudeau government or effectively the government of Canada. So, but this is a uniquely rare thing to happen in Canada. Like I don't think you would have seen flags like this. There's no shortage of being angry at politicians in the past, but this is something that it I couldn't have. Could you have imagined when you showed up to Canada in the 80s when you were first here as an immigrant and you're getting to know the country and you're seeing what Canadians, I'm sure even then there was Canadians who were upset with what the government was doing for different things. But could you imagine having a flag like that flying in Canada?
Probably not. Not at the time, no.
Yeah. So some things happen to Canadian society, but simultaneously there's still this like level of uh, uh, perceived politeness and like taboo to talk bad about Canada that makes having these social discussions quite challenging. And Tucker was, as you said, as blunt as you can be,
Oh,
and
he was
it's refreshing.
merciless.
It's refreshing, and
He was
I also
American
wonder,
all the way.
and he did it in the most, for lack of a better word, and I hope Albertans will take this with a grain of salt and be patriotically Canadian, and know that I'm not talking about the worst parts of America when I say this, but Albertans are the most American Canadians that exist. When I'm talking about like the values that I hold as an American, that was the audience that was going to be the most receptive. But you even pointed out there's some things you would expect that audience who is very, very open to what Tucker is saying. There's some points where you and I were probably at the edge of our seats going, yeah. But the audience was quite muted in tone
Yes.
about it. And but maybe that's a good thing. That's uniquely Canadian, but it's interesting.
Yes. Some of those issues that, I mean, they're already, well-known issues. And what he was talking about is the big one was uh, kind of the same thing that's happening in America. What makes the Canadian government thinking, bringing all these millions of refugees or people to Canada, and those people, when Canada is already struggling economically, has no housing, no jobs for those people, they have no skills, but they're bringing such a huge numbers, to create strain on the society, but also changing society from what the society was for, hundreds of years really, is being reshaped within just few years so dramatically. And I witness it myself when I come to Canada lately. It feels like, wow, and I'm in Canada or I'm in the Middle East somewhere or some other countries that, it's not, I don't even recognize Canada. And it's just, so that Tucker was pointing it out, why the government is doing it, to such a fast changes to country that's not beneficial to the country in any way. And there was just one issue he brought up that I don't know if you have any thought on that or comment on that.
Well, just from like how can this kind of mentality exist in a country like Canada? I think it kind of makes sense. Like, so I often say that this view that Canadians are super, super polite is, you haven't been to Canada, if that's the case. And I often think that most people get that impression because traveled Canadians have a tendency to set a standard for what other people are going to interpret Canadians to be like. And
I
traveled
think so.
Canadians do have this tendency to be very, very polite, well-spoken, those kinds of things. So um, that's all one thing. So we have this like international perception as being an incredibly polite place, and it's a vision of that Canadians, again, going back to that, like, we're proud of being Canadians. We want that to be the international perception of us. You've ever been to Canada, especially a big major city, you've been told to screw off. You've been like, there are rude people. There's they exist everywhere. Canadians are not universally polite, but there's a mentality in Canada that that's what we are. And when you look at the scale of countries out there, Canada is an incredibly affluent country. Not all Canadians are millionaires, not by a long shot. But when you look at the like per capita number of very wealthy people compared to the total population of Canada, it is inordinately high compared to a lot of other countries. And that provides an opportunity for Canadians to be an economy that can be incredibly gracious before it really starts to hurt. So we have now had 60 years of pretending that our economy can support any government spending that the government wants to, and it doesn't matter, we can help any country, and we're the land of open arms, and it's this mentality that all Canadians want Canada to be seen as, but we can't afford it. Like, even Canada,
No.
much like Sweden, a country where the socialist principles that you and I would fight against now and would argue don't make economic sense, can kind of work in those countries, even if for a short period of time, because the country's economy can support a significant amount of burden. Right? So like, any social programs you set up in a country like Sweden, when the population was 4 million people, but you have one of the largest GDPs in the world because of the number of really hardworking, incredible Swedish companies that do so much, right? Canada is another example of that. It's a country of
Natural
36 million
resources,
people.
yeah.
Exactly. Like, so it can support a lot before that burden becomes untenable, and before you're kind of like looking with your hindsight glasses going, holy crap, how did we get into this situation? Because anyway, you get what I'm saying. So that's how I think Canada has gotten into this situation. It doesn't justify us continuing to do it. Like, it's painfully obvious we can't support this. There's cultural reasons why we shouldn't want to just be importing people in mass. There's social reasons internally, like if you care about people who are destitute, you have no excuse to really be homeless in Canada. But if you are, then you're one of the many, many Canadians out there that could be pointed at and say, how come we're not helping this person? I would argue we are. They just choose to live that lifestyle. But it's like, there's so many people in that economic rung that how can we import more people to support at that kind of level when we've already had deficit spending in every single one of these programs for the last 20 years.
Right.
So
Yes.
what, we're going to increase the population of people who need, and side. Is that me being kicked out again?
I lost the voice again.
Sorry, folks, some technical issues. You can call me a millennial all you want, but I'm a little too trusting with technology sometimes, and then it craps out on you, and you're staring at a screen wondering, well, now what do I do?
So yeah, so many of the issue that Tucker, talk about, and there were like issues like when you break it down, you say, when you actually start noticing how many issues there are, it kind of becomes, wow, that's like something. And some of the issues that he brought up was healthcare, of course, how the healthcare in Canada is failing people now. He talked about that. And now, don't quote me, because some of those things, as I said, might be from the previous video that I watched, and now I cannot find it.
Right.
Then he talked about, of course, the transgender and diversity issues, big time about, and joked about that a lot. Something that he's watching on a Canadian TV a lot. Then he, talked about how, the media, most media in Canada are subsidized by the government, which doesn't make for a free society. He talked about that issue. Then he talked about the assisted suicide, and he was very upset with that, and he had some good points about that. Seem to be many people are choosing suicide in Canada because they have no healthcare options that the government doesn't provide to them, or they are depressed because what's going on in Canada, and they cannot get help, or they're not getting any help, and they kind of in a huge number have that assisted suicide that's provided by government as a solution. He seemed to
And
be very upset about that.
we can kind of like just to touch on that briefly, like again, because I think there's a huge misunderstanding about what the concern people have is. The concern for a lot of Canadians, and I can again speak a little uniquely because of what has recently happened with my grandfather, someone who was diagnosed with severely aggressive carcinoma and had no interest in going through the entire battle in something that was definitively terminal, was in a situation where had weighed all his odds. He felt that he'd lived a great life, and every single one of us in the family would have supported him, though it's heartbreaking to have happen. We did support him in his decision to do that, and I'm so thankful that we live in a country where that was an opportunity for him, that he didn't need to just live through the suffering, that he was able to approach that in a kind of dignified way. So that's great. And when we as Canadians, or whoever might be getting upset at the notion that Canada seems to really be pushing this idea, isn't those cases, isn't the cases of people who are with terminal sickness and genuinely have thought about all their odds. The concern that a lot of us have is that the government is just kind of saying like, oh, look how many people we're helping with this. If you use the same statistics to just say, oh, look how many Canadians are committing suicide, every single person would say, oh my God, that's horrific. Like what's going on? There's a mental health issue here. Like what we should be reaching out to these people and helping them. We don't want them committing suicide. But as soon as you rubber stamp it and say, well, a doctor is doing it and this is government assisted and then it whites the whole thing, whitewashes the whole thing. And it's kind of like, oh, this is the Canadian government helping people. Our concern is that if you're seeing a marked increase in the number of people opting for this, is this not the same thing as suicide? And I don't really want to belabor the point, but I think any intelligent person can understand that the false equivalency that's happening there is like, just because the government is doing it doesn't mean that maybe a lot of those people had other opportunities, other things that they should have been doing instead of just opting to call her quits. And that's the concern that a lot of Canadians have. And there's these weird horror stories that are debated in the media and on social. And I've had conversations with very astute professionals and lawyers in this field that don't believe all of the hype that's happening about, the Canadian government is suggesting that veterans kill themselves, And I don't really know, I don't know that we have the evidence to prove that there's like some serious conspiracy to try and do this. The concern that I think a lot of Canadians have is just that. How come we're not looking at an increased number of government-assisted suicide as a cause for mental health? Why is that increased number
that's a good
given
point.
like
Yes.
a thumbs up? It shouldn't be. It should always be a concern. That these people aren't jumping off of bridges is awesome. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. Then he talked about, and that's the thing that I don't think I saw in, and correct me, in the video that you sent me. He talked about the freelance lady. I don't know if she if she mentioned in a video that you sent me, because I don't remember hearing it there. But in the thing that I watched, he was talking about her, and he said actually he knew her before she was even in the government. She was a journalist, and he didn't have anything positive to say about her when she was a journalist. She said, "Wow, this lady has so much self-esteem that no matter how wrong she is or what she's so sure of herself, so full of self-esteem that he said the whole Canada could be hide like as a dome, as a protection under her self-esteem. She
That's
cannot be
insane.
wrong.
It's
So I don't know if it was the part.
No, it wasn't the video that I'd sent, but that's
Okay, so I saw something different. So how it disappeared then?
I don't know.
It's just a
And
mystery.
there's another video that Tucker's released that I haven't watched yet. That's exactly what you were talking about. So I have a feeling that's the video, though I'm assuming you didn't watch it on his actual channel. But there's a video he's released about liberating Canada. So I'm assuming that's what it is, and I'll have to give that a watch today and see if it hits all those same points. On Freeland though, like that's another one of the things that he points out. I don't think he explicitly talks about it in terms of her, although she is a horrific example here in Canada. But he does discuss the media and the concerns about it being entirely controlled by the government and things like that. One of the things I would love to bring up though, for anyone that doesn't know about it, and I'll insert maybe a clip of it actually happening, because I worked on a video for some other people about this subject, and that was the arrest of David Menzies here in Canada. This was a couple weeks ago now, but the arrest of David Menzies, who's one of the lead journalists and reporters for Rebel News here in Canada.
Yes, I saw that.
Did you ever hear? Okay, so you heard about that. But it's like, so it's so painfully obvious. We're now arresting journalists who won't toe the party line here in Canada.
Why are you pushing me? You're under arrest for assault. You're under arrest for assault. Police.
The most disturbing part, though, is just the way she responds. You could do a whole video just about how creepy Freeland is. Because if you look at her responses, the way it's like Canada's Kamala Harris, where you just
except smarter and more ruthless.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yes, yeah. No, I'll give her that credit. Some of the decisions that they make as a government are just so stupid that you have to assume that each person is a moron, but they're not. They're incredibly intelligent, and you can see that by how long they've been getting away with this stuff. But she is just incredibly creepy. I don't understand.
Well, they talk about the forced vaccinations. He mentioned just about the trackers, just lots of things that it happened in Canada, and I probably just mentioned about at least 10 major points that just seem to be incredibly affecting the Canada. And many of those things are happening, on the same level, or not on the same level, but maybe different way it plays out in the United States. Now, one of the interesting things when you mentioned Kamala Harris, have you noticed something lately in the last few months, maybe about 2 months now? She's nowhere on social media. You know how she did all these word salads and all this, everybody making joke of her because what she says doesn't make any sense. Now, for at least 2 months, she's like, I don't see anything about her. I mean, it's like she doesn't even exist.
You know why, right?
Well, I don't know.
Because all those social media managers are currently working for Nikki Haley.
I guess maybe, but it's just.
If you look at Nikki Haley's Twitter feed and the social media posts and stuff that she comes out they've been coming out with, obviously it's not her posting. Obviously it's not her posting them. It's her campaign team and whoever's managing your social media accounts and those kinds of things.
Right.
But there's a great one that I'll put up if I could find it when I'm editing. Was her trying to claim that that the people just aren't being realistic about the actual numbers about who would be more likely to win against Joe Biden, her or Donald Trump. And they put up her social media campaign advisors, whatever, put up this graphic of this one obscure, ridiculous poll result that if you look at like the Quinnipiac, I think that's what's called, like the aggregated scores across like all of the kind of most widely accepted, the projections. I don't know why my brain's not working right now. Anyways, it's insane the kind of like mental gymnastics that the Nikki Haley campaign must be jumping through in order to make those kinds of posts, because it's so obviously transparent. And what you're saying is kind of very wishy-washy and flip-floppy. That's all. It makes me think, all the people that used to work and deal with posting Kamala Harris's posts, they must have gotten laid off and immediately jumped onto the Nikki Haley bandwagon, because there's just a lot of similarities there. All right, well, I think if anyone hasn't seen the videos, we'll link both of them as soon as we find the second one, and I confirm with Peter that it's the video he was watching. We'll link both of the videos that we're talking about in the description below, or I'll put some cards up during the actual post on YouTube. Maybe I'll teach Peter how to do that. It's an opportunity. So we strongly encourage you guys to go and watch that. This was just kind of our insight on kind of like, as people who have either been born and raised in Canada, or someone like Peter who immigrated to Canada and lived here for a long time. It's our insight to just how right it feels like what he's saying is. So we really, really encourage you guys to go and watch it. Otherwise, that was a great conversation.
No, I just don't know how long the Tucker is going to be in Canada, but let's just keep watching that and see. I don't know if it's was longer, if it's going to go to other parts of Canada or just stay in the Alberta was the only thing, or if they're going to deport him or anything. Let's just see what's going to happen.
Forcibly. I wouldn't be surprised if they filmed all this stuff and then he got back to the United States technically before they started releasing the video evidence. But yeah, no, if he ends up anywhere near me, I'll see what I can do to try and maybe attend the event or something like that. But I doubt it. I genuinely think he would have gone to Alberta, because that's probably the one place in Canada he could get away with it, provided he gets out of the country fast enough. So anyway,
all right, then.
Have a great
See
day,
you next
everyone.
time,
Stay
then.
tuned next week, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Simple Jargon Podcast.